The place of Muslims in today's India is a sensitive, difficult, and a critically important conversation. And a new book seeks to have that conversation going beyond labels and stereotypes. But this is also a day on which there has been a big Supreme Court judgment when it comes to the rights of Muslim women. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. Our focus today is looking at the place of Muslims in today's India on a day when the Supreme Court has said that all Muslim women are entitled to alimony under the same section of the CrPc as women from other faiths. In other words, it is a secular law that covers the rights of Muslim women alongside other women, irrespective of religion. This was the big verdict from the Supreme Court when it came to the rights of Muslim women, a judgment that is likely to reopen the contentious debate around a uniform civil code. At the same time, questions remain. How will the Prime Minister be vis-a-vis the Muslim community in his third term? Remember, the election campaign has been a particularly vitriolic one and a divisive one. At the same time, how will the non-BJP parties respond? Religion is now firmly not just in the public space of India where it's always been, it's also in parliament, with Rahul Gandhi holding up images of not just Lord Shiva, but religious leaders of all faiths. The non-BJP opposition seems to be using Hinduism to counter Hindutva. But a new book by Hilal Ahmed argues that this is a lazy counter. The book, A Brief History of the Present, looking at Muslims in today's India, in New India as it's called, talks about how there is a necessity to go beyond the labels and the stereotypes, the narrow silos that have conventionally defined this debate. Joining us now is our guest today, the author of this book, Professor Hilal Ahmed, a well-known author, political researcher with Lokniti CSDS. Thank you, Hilal, very much. And it's completely uncanny that as we decided to have this conversation about your book and the subject you focused on, comes this big Supreme Court order on the rights of Muslim women, which very simply put, basically argues that Muslim women and all Indian women, irrespective of religion, are covered by the CrPc, by a secular law, not a personal law, when it comes to seeking alimony from their divorced husbands or their ex-husbands. So before we come to, in a sense, the book itself, this is the very interesting framework within which we can actually start to talk about your book. How do you look at this order, Hilal?
First of all, because as I have not seen the order by myself, so I'm not in a position to make any conclusive argument or position or take any position on that. Having said that, I think whatever you just said and whatever I have seen on social media, I personally would welcome this decision because it is based on some conception of secular law, and second is it is also making us aware of the fact that there is a significance of gender justice in our country. Having said that, I think there are two critical points which we must remember. One is that something called a customary money that is given to Muslim women at the time of wedding called meher is a critical point in the entire debate on providing maintenance after divorce. So what will happen to that? Second, and most importantly, a law passed by the parliament in 2019, which is known as Triple Talaq law. I think what would be the implication of this judgment on that law? So these are the two important points which we must have to understand in the wider context in which this judgment is passed. So, but personally, I think that I would appreciate this judgment, and this is not my personal opinion, because in our various surveys, we also find there was an overwhelming opposition to the idea of triple talaq. And the condition of Muslim women is really pathetic. Unfortunately, the problem is that on the one hand, there is a political party called BJP, which is demonizing Muslim, everything that is associated with Muslims. And on the other hand, the non-BJP parties are not interested in looking at the question of social problems having inside Muslim communities, as well as their backwardness. So it is a very strange context in which you have a political party which would like to have, which has already created a Hindutva constituency of voter, and on the other hand, you have a political different political parties who know that Muslims are not going to vote for BJP and eventually they will vote for us. So therefore, we don't need to do anything specific about them. So this is a very strange political situation where Muslims are completely abandoned by the entire political class. And this judgment in that sense is relevant and important.
You say that Muslims are abandoned by the political class, but the BJP calls them, accuses the non-BJP parties of treating them as a vote bank. And the paradox is that it's under a BJP government that this triple talaq judgment has been pushed. So how do you see that?
I say that the non-BJP parties are not serious. I think if you look at, I will give you just one example, and that is the Pasmanda question. I've discussed that in great detail in my book. The Pasmanda question is, or the Pasmanda demand has been that the state should provide affirmative action to Muslim backwards, and in such a way that there should be a parity between Hindu Dalits and Muslim Dalits as well. This is not a new demand. In fact, Nitish Kumar's party, when he was a part of UPA, played a significant role in nurturing Pasmanda politics in Bihar. Now, the same Nitish Kumar has somehow completely indifferent to the Pasmanda demands. Interestingly, the other non-BJP parties who played a very significant role in, say, establishing such a commission report or Rangnath Mishra commission report, they have completely ignored them. In fact, if you look at Congress manifesto of 2019 and 2024, you did not find any reference to such a commission report, despite the fact that these were the political parties who were at the forefront to raise the question of Muslim backwardness. In this sense, I'm making the point that the political class is not interested, and this entire business of Muslim appeasement is actually a political reference point for BJP, not merely to criticize non-BJP parties, but to consolidate their own Hindutva voters.
I'll come to that in just a moment, but to return to the Supreme Court judgment just for a moment, the fact that the Supreme Court has said that Muslim women, alongside women of other faiths in India, can take recourse to the same law. In other words, not personal law, not Sharia law, not any kind of religious law, that there's a common law that defines the rights of Indian women, is going to reopen the Uniform Civil Code debate. Where do you see that as you look at Muslims in New India?
So there are two responses to that. One response is legal constitutional response. If you look at the constitution and look at the manner in which what is the status of a particular law with regard to constitutional law, constitution is very clear that if there is a conflict between these two, the constitutional law will prevail. That's one. Second thing is that what is the status of personal laws? So personal laws are obviously personal laws and customary laws are not above the constitutional law. If that is the case, I think we should welcome this judgment. Now, the third point is actually a critical point. That is that when we say UCC, what do we mean by that? Obviously, UCC is listed in something called Directive Principles of State Policy in the Constitution. Now, these directive principles are very, very crucial because these principles are basically listed in order to provide a direction to the government and the values which are to be implemented in future. These are very important and significant things. And these elements must be taken in their entirety. You cannot say that I'm picking up the UCC and I forget about the equal opportunities which is ensured in not merely in directive principle but also in fundamental rights. So providing UCC will become meaningful if we look at the constitutional principle in their entirety. If that is not going to happen, then it will become a political ploy.
Let's come to your book, where you actually speak about the concept of Hindutva constitutionalism, and you also speak about how the non-BJP parties' attempts to counter Hindutva with Hinduism is something that you call intellectual liberal laziness. You see, so recently in Parliament we saw Rahul Gandhi trying to take a bit of that Hinduism space, saying Hinduism doesn't belong to the BJP. Narendra Modi does not equal the BJP. When the BJP accused him of insulting the Hindu Samaj, he said, no, Mr. Modi is not equal the Hindu Samaj. So, and you write in your book about how other liberals, Pawan Verma, Shashi Tharoor, have tried to do the same thing. First, let's start about what you mean by Hindutva constitutionalism. What do you mean?
See, constitutionalism is a positive term. It is a normative term which makes a distinction between the right of citizens and the state. But there is another and much more specific political interpretation of constitutionalism. Every political party in India would look at the constitution from its own ideological vantage point. So the Congress would, the socialistic pattern of society was somehow Nehru's interpretation of the constitution. Look at the Communist Party's change in the system was also an interpretation of that kind. Now, RSS and BJP, and before BJP it was Jansangh, they were very uncomfortable with the constitution from its beginning. Their attitude changed in the 1990s, late 1990s, after when they constituted a commission to review the constitution. And after that, and I think in my book, I said that I should give credit to Narendra Modi, the individual, because he emphasizes that constitution can be interpreted from Hindutva point of view as well. And this is what I called Hindutva constitutionalism. But there are three features of Hindutva constitutionalism which we must remember. One, that Hindutva constitution believes in a distinction between principles and laws or rules. The argument is that principles are settled. The constitutional principle of equality, etc., these things are settled. What we really need to treat, we should treat constitution as a rule book. And this is what we saw in different ways in which constitution is used as an instrument. For example, hijab case, or later on, there are a number of instances in CAA as well. Constitution was highlighted as some kind of a rule book. That's one feature. Second feature is there's a lot of emphasis on the idea of minority, not majority. The people who would say that BJP actually indulge in a politics of majoritarianism, my argument is no, they are not doing a politics of majoritarianism. Rather, they are actually doing a politics of Hindu victimhood. And for that, the idea of minority is very important. The entire CAA business was all about evoking the idea of minority to legitimize the victimhood of Hindus in a larger context, including South Asia. The third thing is one nation, one constitution. And this became very clear when the Article 370 was actually abrogated in 2019. So the point I'm trying to make with Hindutva constitutionalism is simply this, that, there is I would say, very interesting engagement with constitution, which was not there in the realm of RSS and BJP. It started in 2014 onwards, and they interpreted constitution very creatively to work out those mechanisms by which their strategies can be legitimized without deviating from the principle, without deviating from the constitution as a reference point.
The fact is, the constitution today is a protagonist in parliament. It was a protagonist in the election campaign. Modi bowed before the constitution. Rahul Gandhi carried it to parliament. You also speak about this Hindutva versus Hinduism dichotomy. And you speak about what you call, liberal intellectual laziness. You say that since 2014, the opposition to the BJP has actually failed to understand Hindutva. And that this is not a sufficient counter. If this is not a sufficient counter, Hilal, what is the counter? Because the opposition would argue that you can't defeat Hindutva with Nehruvian secularism. You have to speak the language of faith to engage with faith. So they fall back on this now somewhat trite, we are also Hindus. You're saying that's not sufficient. Why do you call this intellectually lazy?
It is intellectually lazy for two reasons. One, it is intellectually lazy because you are actually trying to respond to the strategic use of Hinduism by BJP, saying that we are more Hindu than you. That's one problem. Second is that you are when we say intellectual laziness, it means that if I'm an intellectual, my task is not to look at what is said to me directly, rather to look at the framework from which an argument is coming. So the framework from which the argument is coming is problematic because there is no place for Muslim in that framework. Look at BJP's framework. BJP is highly uncomfortable with medieval Indian history. And that's the reason why I use the term laziness. So there are two possibilities. One, that I start saying that, okay, temple were destroyed, etc. Muslim, that was the time when Muslim were the rulers and they were, despotic, etc. And then I would say that the common Muslim did not have any relation with them. That's one kind of argument. But this argument, which eventually support the BJP claim that we were subjugated in medieval times, I would say that what BJP is presented to us as history is not history. It's a political interpretation of the past. And therefore, there is a need to do a systematic revision of the framework that is offered to us. In my framework, I would argue that we have to look at the present, the post-colonial India as our reference point, and try to look at the idea of heritage afresh. And this idea of heritage should be separated from the kind of categories which we use in colonial India and then, during the time of partition were Hindu and Muslim. We are actually going back to those categories. Instead of using Hindu and Muslim as category, we can think of something else. I am not a politician, so I'm not in a position to propose new categories. My task is to look at what is given to us in the name of countering Hindutva, that is Hinduism. And this Hinduism, in my view, is highly problematic. This is not Gandhi's Hinduism, by the way. Many people would say that, many non-BJP parties, political leaders are actually doing Gandhian politics. This is not Gandhian politics, remember. Gandhian politics is significantly different from this politics in two ways. One, Gandhi was not interested in electoral politics. He was not going to the people to ask vote for himself. On the other hand, he was saying that religion has got a social presence, and the religion which is practiced should not be the ritualistic religion. In my book, there is an argument that contemporary religiosity is, not philosophical, but it has been reduced to something called ritualism. So Gandhi was very critical of ritualism and and that's the reason why you have to make a distinction between ritual and the philosophy. Now, no public intellectual who is associated with any non-BJP party has tried to come out with a philosophical argument to make that claim. Even
some might argue that Rahul Gandhi, with a lot of missteps, has attempted that. So for example, Ajaz Ashraf in a recent column argued that Rahul Gandhi represents the Hindu left trying to take on the Hindu right. So there's certainly no disavowal of faith. But for example, he recently said that, we have defeated the Ram Mandir movement. In Parliament, he showed Lord Shiva, but he also showed Guru Nanak. He also spoke about Islam. He also spoke about, Christianity. So there was a sort of multi-faith reference. And they would say that is what Gandhiji did also. Gandhiji never gave up the language of his own religion, but he created space for all religions, including Muslims, within that. How do you see Rahul Gandhi's attempt and since you've said that this is not Mahatma Gandhi's politics, what is that fundamental difference?
Fundamental difference is that Gandhi was interested in social change. For Gandhi, there is something called an imagination of future. And that imagination has to be worked out in a collective way without giving up one's religious identity. But in this case, if the idea is reduced primarily to win election, then it will become problematic, because you have to be very clear what the objective is. If the objective is to change this. So that's why I really appreciate the manner in which Rahul Gandhi actually conducted two Bharat Jodo Yatras. It was a great achievement, because for the first time in last 10 years, he went to the people and talked to them. What is actually surprising, that despite being among the people, he did not come out with a very positive understanding of Muslim. How should you accommodate the word called Muslim in it? Rahul Gandhi's speeches are fine. I don't have any problem with that. But he hesitant to make this word Muslim. He did not say anything about lynching of Muslim in the parliament. Now, they are not 230. They are now 232 opposition MPs. Look at their strength in parliament. So obviously the lynching is happening, and you should have some kind of a principled position on Muslims. And until, obviously Hinduism is fine. Hinduism of BJP is problematic, that's understandable. But what about the lynching of Muslims? And therefore, there is a need to have a principal position. Gandhi did not give up the idea of respecting Muslim in his prayer meetings. Even, in 1947, there was a prayer meeting happening, and Gandhi started that prayer meeting with the recitation of Quran. And he said that I am completely sure that no one is going to object it, because this is my fundamental faith in the idea of God. I think that kind of thing is needed. We have an idiom called a saintly idiom in politics.
I'll tell
That
you the
saintly
only
idiom,
that saintly idiom, the only institution where I've actually seen it practiced is within the Indian military. You actually have regiments where a Hindu commanding officer will lead the namaz prayers, and vice versa. A Muslim will perform the arti, and I have seen this personally. That language of pluralistic faith. And that is another point you make, when you quote Rajiv Bhargav in your book, and you make the argument that this public manifestation of religion, this has always been the Indian idea of secularism. It was never anything else. Somewhere along the way, and I think the line you use is the opposition has been engaging with a politically disastrous form of secularism. This is what your book says. Can you give an example of the politically disastrous form of secularism?
because if the secularism is reduced to making an assumption, like in 90s social justice politics, it was assumed that OBC, Dalit, Muslim, they would make a configuration, and that configuration will always remain secular. And the amalgamation of, say, SP, RJD, and other political parties will always be called secular. No, because they were guided by their political interest, and that's why the interest orientation of political class must be taken into consideration. But the kind of secularism Rajiv Bhargav argues, or the kind of secularism we observed in number of studies which we have done in CSDS, we find that people would like to live together in such a way that they do not want to become enemy of each other. And that people's secularism require, and that's, by the way, to answer the first question is this, that, in our survey, we find that the OBC, the success of BJP in last 3 election is significantly related to the move which lower OBC and upper OBC voter, they actually abandoned their own conventional parties and moved towards BJP. What does it mean? It means that the imagination we had in the 90s were wrong. We were wrong. Now, in this context, what is people's secularism? So because we did not pay attention to people's secularism, and we did not develop a language of politics in which that secularism can be accommodated, political parties like BJP took advantage of it, and they got advantage in a significant way. So therefore, I would argue strongly that there is a need to have some kind of a language in which people's secularism, living together separately attitude, can be accommodated.
Let's talk a little bit about political options and political representation. Now, you quote CSDS data, and this is obviously not about 2024, but earlier, to say that in constituencies where there are more than 40% Muslims, there is clear religious polarization. But where there are, let's say, 20% Muslims, the Muslim is more willing to engage with a whole array of options. So that's the first interesting point. But when you look at leaders like Asaduddin Owaisi, who have clearly, in a sense, positioned themselves as Muslim leaders speaking for the Muslim Samaj, right? But in a very stereotypical way that further perpetuates some of the cultural stereotypes about Muslims. Then is this a very difficult question? Because on the one hand, you have the BJP, which has politics that are seen to be antagonistic to the Muslim. You have the non-BJP opposition that is defensive about including the Muslims. And then you have Asaduddin Owaisi, who is playing a very orthodox version of Muslim politics, right? So these are diminishing options politically, but has anything changed after this election, you think? This election result?
Even before that, even before this election, things changed. In fact, but if you go back to the book, you find that there are two ways in which you can understand politics. One is electoral politics, and electoral politics, unfortunately, is now reduced to number games. But there is another form of politics, which is social politics, the politics that is constituted at the social level. And we find that in last 10 years, the social politics somehow got strengthened. And that's the reason why, because that politics somehow in last 5 6 years had, strengthened, that the outcome of this election is inextricably linked to that politics. So I'll give you two examples of that politics. One is that look at CEA, anti-CEA protest. There are two ways to look at anti-CEA. One is that we reduce everything to that was Muslim-led. Obviously, it was Muslim-led. But look at the kind of argument made by common Muslims during anti-CEA protest. They had the copy of Constitution in their hands. They were reading the preamble, and they were having Gandhi, Nehru, and Bhagat Singh and Ambedkar's images in virtually all dharnas that were organized by Muslim, particularly by Muslim women. What does it mean? It means that there was a strong assertion that we are part of this fabric, and the political heritage that is available to us must be evoked to protect our interests. So in that sense, it was a highly secular version of Muslim politics that was actually led by Muslim women and other deprived section of society. One example. My second example is Pasmanda politics. Pasmanda politics has been arguing that you need not to give any specific quota for Muslims in, say, for instance, OBC. They would say divide OBC into two categories, OBC and MBC, and just use the secular criteria to evaluate their backwardness. Their assertion is that because Muslims are socially and economically backward, they will certainly come in most backward category. Similarly, they make this argument that why can't we have this scheduled caste category? We can secularize it. This category is communal because only Sikh, Hindu, and Buddhist are eligible for having such scheduled caste status. Christian Dalits and Muslim Dalits do not have any right to have scheduled caste status. If that is the case, then the Pasmanda demand is that this category of scheduled caste must be secularized, and there should be at the same time, and that's the most important point, which is coming out from Muslim politics and others are completely silent about it. And that is what is happening in the country is not public sector, but the private sector. There should be some kind of affirmative action in the private sector. No one is talking about that. Even if you look at the, except a serious leadership of Dalit communities, you do not find mainstream political party making this demand that there is a serious need to have some kind of affirmative action in the private sector. What does it mean? It means that socio-economic question and the question of secularism are inextricably linked to each other. And we cannot say that only one kind of politics will support the other. Until and unless you have material question resolved, you won't have secularism of people in place.
Now, let me end by how interestingly your book looks at the Pew survey findings. So the Pew survey, as we know, found that 24%, and I'm going to say only 24% of Muslims said they face a lot of discrimination. I use the word only because, one would have thought that given what's happening today, the number and the debates today, the number would be much higher. But you break it down region-wise to talk about how there is a greater perception of discrimination in the north. So there are also regional variations. That's the first point. But the second more interesting point is, who is a liberal Muslim? You talk about the political abandonment of the liberal Muslim, but how do you define who the liberal Muslim is? Is it a Javed Akhtar who's not a believing Muslim but a cultural Muslim? You speak about Naseeruddin Shah. You speak about yourself. If you were to define who is a liberal Muslim, who is a liberal Muslim, Hilal?
I am a liberal Muslim. No, because this category, that the chapter is written as a kind of a self-criticism. Because Hassan Surur wrote a fantastic book, Who Killed Liberal Islam? And somehow we all are actually responsible. All those who call themselves ourselves as liberal Muslims, somehow we are responsible because we could not establish a direct link between those who were actually saying themselves proudly that they are Muslim with the ethos or the political ethos of the country and their engagement with that. So
Yeah.
somehow we ourselves disassociate with Muslim communities, and as a result, uh, Congress-led secular parties somehow nurtured all of us, and that nurturing, played a significant role in creating a rift between the anxieties and aspiration of common Muslims and the Muslim liberals, people like me, who would represent themselves as the voice of these people.
And yet you argue that when the ordinary Muslim, for lack of a better phrase, who may not identify as liberal, who doesn't necessarily see these nomenclatures in the way we do, when they see images like this of a policeman kicking a namazi, right? And there's a big ferocious debate on whether namaz should take place in public spaces, but also whether this policeman should have been suspended. You argue that most Indian Muslims, according to you, are looking at this not through the prism of religious intolerance, but a political phenomena, that they actually see this as a byproduct of politics. In other
Yes.
words, if politics changes, then the place of Muslims will also change.
Absolutely. Because I offer namaz. I don't feel any threat that suppose if I go and offer namaz somewhere, nobody is going. I have some kind of privileges, and these privileges are there because I'm educated. I speak English, etc.
Yeah.
But common Muslims do not have that privilege. For them, what is important is survival strategies. So they
Yeah.
see these things as a political phenomena, and they would like to engage with the political system in such a way that their existence is survived. So this is actually a battle of survival. And in my book, I have tried to show various survival strategies across regions. Obviously, there is also a point which I would like to emphasize here is that we think of Muslim as a homogeneous community. This is not true. Muslims are highly diversified, and this diversity must be actually recognized at the state level or at the level where they live, at the bottom level of society, grassroots level. So the grassroots engagement of Muslims with different forms of politics, different social movements, different realm of engagement, I think that need to be captured, and I've tried to do that in this book.
Let me end by asking you what, obviously, the book was written before the 2024 verdict. Now we have a contested space in our politics in the way that it was not maybe even a year ago. What do you think will happen now? You've been a student of politics for so long. We don't know yet what version of the prime minister we're going to see. We also don't know yet what version of Rahul Gandhi and the opposition we're going to see when it comes to the question of Muslims. In the campaign, certainly not just was there defensiveness, the non-BJP parties reduced the number of tickets given to Muslim candidates, right? We know this. What are you expecting? You speak in your book about Muslims who are willing to engage with the BJP at a local level because they have to engage with their local legislator, their local administration, their local MP. Yet the BJP today, I think, mistakenly believes that it's, Muslim consolidation has taken it below a majority mark. I think the shifting of the Dalit vote is a big part of why the BJP has performed the way it has. What do you expect? How do you expect the politics now to change?
Two things. One is that, it's a very interesting moment of politics where the old narrative of politics has not gone down and the new one has not, adequately articulated. So the old dominant narrative of politics is still Hindutva. So Hindutva is a dominant narrative of politics, and every political party would have to take into consideration the metaphor and the idioms that are produced by that narrative. That has not yet gone. On the other hand, a new narrative of politics is gradually unfolding, and that is the narrative of Nyaya or social justice. This social justice narrative is very different from the 1990 social justice narrative. In the 1990 social justice narrative, the emphasis was on the configuration of caste and religious identities. This time, caste, religion, and economic disparity, which is a new element. So that's the reason why I appreciated and I wrote extensively on Congress manifesto, because in my view, that has been one of the most significant political document of our time in last 10 years. So the first thing is that old narrative has not yet gone down, and the new narrative has not yet actually articulated properly. So there is a tussle between these two, and it would be interesting to observe how this tussle get resolved. Obviously, this judgment, for example, the judgment, Supreme Court judgment today. So this judgment, there is one way of looking at it from the point of view of Hindutva. We can say that it is actually a Hindutva judgment, etc., and it will lead to UCC, etc. But if it is not the dominant narrative and the narrative is social justice and equality, we would have been saying something else. We would say that no, it is actually a justice, and it will lead to greater democratization, gender justice, etc. So I think it all depends on the metaphor that is given to us by these two narratives, these two competing narratives. It is up to the Congress and non-BJP parties. They have got the number. Now they must do serious introspection of their intellectual position. Remember that BJP's actually lacuna is, the problem of BJP is that they are anti-intellectual. They are not anti-intellectual in terms of relegating liberals to the margin, but they are also in general opposed to their own intellectual. So their intellectual class is somehow suffocating. But this is not the case with non-BJP parties. And non-BJP parties has got some kind of an advantage that they should do. And Congress, as I said, Congress manifesto is a remarkable achievement of non-BJP parties. They have to build this up on.
Okay, we leave it there. It's a fascinating book. It will trigger many debates and equal outrage among, both liberals as well as BJP supporters. And that is the sign, in my opinion, of a good provocative thesis. Thank you, Professor Hilal Ahmed, for talking to us. Hilal Ahmed's book, A Brief History of the Present, looking at Muslims in New India, is out. And I would urge everybody who's interested in politics, but also the future and the present of our country, to read it. Thank you so much, Hilal, and take care.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.